Ladies and gentlemen, hello, and we have fantastic guests for our panel about European competitiveness, how to be better than we are right now. We have our Minister of State Assets, Jakub Jaworowski, Martin Wolf, Chief of Economics Commentator at the Financial Times, Dalida Gepfert, Vice President, Grupa Enea Management Board, and Krzysztof Krawczyk, Head of Polish Operations, CVC Capital Partners, and Chairman of the Board of Żabka. What a sound of the word. And we are not going to start with politicians. Let's start with that. And to go into the future, let's go back in time into the past for a moment at the very beginning. In 2007, during the Munich conference, security conference, Putin delivered his famous speech at that time, which was the beginning of the imperial trajectory of Russian Federation. At that time, in 2007, the combined GDP of European Union and the United States was almost exactly on the same level, $14 trillion. In 2024, combined GDP of European Union was $19 trillion. Even if we add the UK, it's $22 trillion. When it comes for America, it's $29 trillion. So 29 trillion, we compare to 22 trillion. So what went wrong in Europe? Martin Wolf.
So first of all, it's a great pleasure and honor to be here with this distinguished panel. And I have to say, this is probably the largest auditorium I have spoken to in my life.
Welcome to Poland. The size matters.
In fact, it's so big that it ought to be in America. I didn't really mean that. So the answer to the question, first of all, I think the number is somewhat misleading because these are figures in nominal aggregate GDP, which are influenced by relative changes in population sizes and movements in exchange rates, which of course have over this period have favored the US. Nonetheless, it is clear that GDP per head, which is more important, has grown faster in the United States than in Europe, and this has been particularly dramatic in the period since the pandemic. The US GDP per head since 2019-24 has risen 9%. The whole of EU has risen by about 4.5%, and the larger European countries have effectively stagnated, with the strange and a remarkable exception of Italy, which has recovered from the huge, deep crisis. Now, why has this relatively poor performance happened? There are several reasons, and I'll just list the most obvious. Europe is relatively resource poor, and above all, energy resource poor, and that has become very much more significant since the war between Russia and Ukraine. That's a very significant factor. Europe had an enormous financial crisis. The Eurozone had an enormous financial crisis, which in my view was catastrophically badly handled and led to years of very, very slow growth, and the costs have not been overcome in any significant way. Europe does not have an integrated single market in the places where it really matters, which is the capital markets and the market for innovation and technology. In the countries that have been really successful in these areas have huge integrated markets. The US and China is increasingly showing the same quality. Europe does not have world-dominant universities, as the US has, and that also affects technology in a very significant way. And European labor markets are, in general, relatively rigid, and that makes it very difficult for the most innovative companies to expand. And finally, Europe simply isn't a magnet for talent from all over the world, given linguistic and other barriers that the US so obviously is. If you add these things together, Europe is suffering from pretty significant constraints, some of which are unavoidable and some of which are the result of policy. Mario Draghi has put forward, I think, a very good program for reform. What are the chances that this will be delivered? In my view, very low. So I am rather pessimistic about the future, but I wouldn't exaggerate how bad it is. I should add perhaps one final thing. Of course, Germany in particular, which has performed incredibly badly in the last 5 years, is being hit by a colossal shock to its biggest sector, the automotive sector, which is a permanent structural technological shock, and China is replacing it as the world's leading exporter and producer of motor vehicles.
Thank you so much, Martin. And two brief informations for our guests from abroad. I made the comparison between GDP of the US and European Union. European Union has much smaller GDP than the US right now. But one important information, and these are data from yesterday. According to this data, Polish GDP has doubled over last decade, which is really impressive. And one more information, you came to Poland in a time of very heated election campaign, which is important. We are going to have presidential elections on Sunday. And when I was talking to candidates during our campaign, some of them are in a way repeating Donald Trump. But when Trump is talking, when he is saying drill, baby, drill, he thinks mostly about oil and gas in the US. In Poland, drill, baby, drill, it means more beautiful Polish coal. That's what they are saying. And when Donald Tusk, our Prime Minister, delivered his first speech in the European Parliament, he said to members of the European Parliament, how do you expect European economy to be competitive if the cost of energy in the US is almost 3 times lower than in Poland? In Enea Group, you have Bogdanka coal mine, which is probably by far the most effective, the most competitive Polish coal mine. And yet, the cost of coal is so much more expensive in Poland than in other parts of the world. If we are not going to transform our energy in Poland, how can we be competitive? What's your point on that?
Thank you for this question. And this is, I think, a really important issue, because very often politics also said, okay, we have to drill, we have a coal, it's about the security. But security today and safety of delivery, supply of energy, it's question about cheap and distributed energy. And it's not about the coal. And you know, when we take the strategy of group in Poland, energy group, we really have to be faster with implementation of renewables energy sources. And it's no question. Of course, the coal can be, but it can to go with lower and lower proportion. It will be in mix, because our mix, of course, is also based on a coal. But every year, and we can see it also, every year it's smaller and smaller proportion, and it will not change. If we would like to be more competitive in Poland and have cheap and cheaper energy than it's today, we have to go to renewable energy, but also we have to consume the energy in a smart way. We need smart way of consumption, we need to effective way, we need to be smart in the way how and where and how we consume the energy. And efficiency, it's like a key.
Krzysztof, when you listen to European politicians, especially in the European Union, most of them would tell us, yes, it is a wake-up call for our defense. It is a wake-up call for our defense industry. In general, it is a wake-up call for a European economy. But do they know how to wake up, really? Do you have a feeling that they really understand the gravity of the situation?
Oh, great question, Piotr. Actually, in order to get good diagnosis of Europe, I would move back even further. 16th century Spain. At that time, it was one of the most powerful empires of the world, controlled vast territories across the globe, probably too much of the territory to control. It was relying on gold and silver derived from Americas, from the colonies. But instead of reinvesting it in their empire, they were importing goods, weakening their economy, creating inflation. On top of it, the political leaders, the leading class, started eroding. So the leadership went sideways, and finally Spain got engaged in many conflicts. So as a result, in 17th and 18th century, it started losing its grip. It lost the 30 years war. It got involved into internal turmoil. And the spectacular blow was losing the colonies that they were relying upon in the early 19th century. Sounds awfully familiar, right?
Right, and not optimistic, as Martin would say.
So I agree with you. We are drowning in a lot of great reports and paper, and it's lacking so what? Of course, energy innovation. Of course, digital transformation. Absolutely, we need strategic autonomy. We need geopolitical cohesion, one voice. But then, how do we affect that? And the answer may be private sector. First of all, double-use technology. I'm sure many of you remember the fantastic scene from biography of Steve Jobs when he was browsing through Xerox Park, Palo Alto Research Center. He actually found what is graphic user interface there, which was sponsored by DARPA-ARPA, which was co-financed by US defense. There is a massive budget coming, 800 billion over the next five years. It is actually commercial private sector that can help create double-use technologies out of it. Let's take another example of Israel. It's recognized widely for being able to do that. So, you know, it's famous Unit 8200, which is training the top talent in cybersecurity and data science. And veterans of that unit, when they retire, they go straight to found startups. They go straight to deploy these technologies in the real life, in a fairly hostile environment. That's one example of how we can take all these great pages into action.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, it will be kind of a compliment. You're not a typical politician. As we all know, you haven't spent decades in a political party, in the parliament. You're a relatively new person in the political system. And you know how the real life looks like. So after not such a long experience in the government, do you believe that politicians are really ready for bold, immediate decisions that are really needed to make our country and in general Europe more competitive?
Thank you. I don't know about the real life. I spent the last 8 years of my life in Dubai. Look, I think I actually share Martin's pessimism on Mario Draghi's report. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember the Lisbon Agenda, which was 2000. And if you look at the objective of the Lisbon Agenda, exactly the same as Mario Draghi's report. 25 years later, we are still debating it. So I'm actually quite pessimistic about this. And I also share Martin's view that the two primary challenges for the European business sector is, number one, scale. The businesses are subscale. And it refers to, in regards to the financial sector, you can easily see this. In the top world's 10 banks, only one is European. The rest is from China and the United States. If you look at tech companies, in the top 50, probably there is only one. German SAP, and there are people who would say that SAP is not actually a high-tech company. So there is definitely something going on there. And obviously there is the technological gap. I think Martin said it all about this, right? So I think these are the two challenges. But I found it very interesting how you started our chat by referring to Putin's speech, right? Because it shows us that actually one of the greatest, in my mind, probably the greatest challenges that the Western world is facing are actually political not economic so much, right? We are in times of geopolitical shifts. Actually, this shift has already happened, right? There is no going back to the world of the Washington consensus, of globalization as we knew it for the past 30 years, and which, by the way, in my mind, brought the great success that Poland has shown, right? But these days are over, and we have to adapt to this, right? And I think the challenge is, and I think there are two challenges for Europe and for Poland, right? One is we need to strengthen and maintain our Euro-Atlantic alliance with the United States. The times have been turbulent, but Europe and the United States were in difficult relationships many a time in the last 70 years or so, and I'm pretty confident that we can maintain this because there is no alternative. If someone tells you that there is an alternative for Europe to the United States, no, there isn't. And number two, I think, now going back to what Martin said and what I share, is that we need to work on deepening the single market, right? Because the advantage that China and the US have is they are one big market for companies, for innovations, for universities.
Martin, it is a time of political election campaign in Poland. You are not going to vote in it, of course, but sometimes there are times when politicians are trying harder to listen to the people. If you would have any suggestion for politicians, your plan, how to make Europe great again, how to be more competitive, what would be your suggestion for us in Poland and for Europeans?
Well, I was going to say, I don't want to leave this with, since we agree so much, with the pessimistic conclusion. I do think we are strangely also have some really big opportunities, and the politicians are to some extent beginning to realize that the opportunity rests in the sorts of crises we now face, which are, John Monnet made the famous remark that Europe will succeed through crisis. And we have a security challenge, which is a first-class security challenge, with a threatening neighbor to the east. We have at least an uncertain relationship with the US, which definitely requires greater independence and resources mobilized by Europeans. I include, of course, the UK in Europe by definition, since we're always part of Europe, however stupid we are. So we also have the opportunity. So those are the challenges we have to meet. And if we meet those, we have to do it together. This requires scale. So I think a lot of these barriers might seem ridiculous in that really major strategic, given the major strategic challenges we face. I also happen to think that Mr. Trump is an opportunity for us because he is doing a remarkable amount of damage, insanely in my view, to the greatest assets the US has, its scientific base and its universities. So it is an opportunity for us to spend more, expand our institutions and attract brilliant people to come to Europe. So all the next bunch of Nobel Prizes are European, which was the case before the Second World War. It's crucial to remember, falling behind like this has happened since the war. Before the World War, all the Nobel Prizes in science were essentially European. And we have to rebuild this. And if we don't recognize, we do need a partnership with the US, yes, absolutely, clearly, no question. But we will get the best partnership with the US by showing the US we are capable of operating independently and successfully, and the alliance is therefore valuable to them, not just a one-sided relationship, which is increasingly how Americans view it. So I think this is both an opportunity and a challenge if the politicians can rise to this occasion.
I had a feeling that you, Minister, wanted to add something.
Yeah, because you asked the question, how do we make Europe great again? And I think we are pretty cool. We are pretty great. I mean, and it's interesting how those slogans about making X, Y, and Z great again come up in areas which are pretty great. And, you know, for all the negativity that we've put out there today, I think if you look at life expectancy, inclusion, Gini coefficient, which is probably around 30 in Europe and 40 in China, 40 in the United States. And if you look at a lot of those pieces of data, you realize that Europe is probably still the best place to be born, right? So you know, the problem is not so much where we are, but we see this tectonic shift, and so we need to figure out how we move forward to maintain what we have and be able to compete.
I totally agree that we are cool. We are the coolest on the planet. Look at us, right?
Especially in Poland.
Totally. And one last round. Yeah, why not? Sure. You know, we have very heated debate in Poland, that's for our guests from abroad, about deregulation in our economy, in our country, in our life in general. And it is a time when politics are trying to listen to business. What would be your idea, your advice? What should we do better in our country to be more competitive? Your message to political words in Poland.
Okay, so basically I agree also with all my what we are talking about, but I'm more optimistic because, you know, I have seen for this last 30 years how we can, as we are so cool in Poland, also transform all the business, making super success story about the business in Poland. And I strongly believe that it's a story to be repeated and continue. But what I suggest, and I strongly believe we need, it is to be faster and braver with risk-taking. Because I think we are standing in some comfort, so we are looking for safe position, but I don't think we should stay in it.
Krzysztof, maybe one last final question. You know, you represent huge global funds. I think when the big guys with big money are thinking where to invest money, and you can choose wherever practically on our planet, what are the reasons why big money from a different place in the world should choose Europe or Poland?
Well, it's actually for the last couple of months, it's not choosing US. There's huge uncertainty that has been with us since January. So it's not so obvious that Europe is not the right destination for capital. You've mentioned you know, regulatory, what I call efficiency. Let's just not create more, let's just fix what we have in terms of regulations. But I cannot agree more with Martin. If we really look at the fundamentals of this continent, it's education. There is a massive pivotal trend coming, which is generative AI. A couple of weeks ago, I was at the board meeting when we asked the management, tell us, what do you exactly do with the software engineers in terms of training them using Gen AI? After 30 minutes of that presentation, I realized that I probably, without zero knowledge of software engineer, I probably could do some code. This is a massive, powerful tool that is available to everyone. Of course, some countries are a little bit ahead, but this is a pivotal moment when Europe can really use the window of opportunity and reskill people and equip them with what I think is like bionicle weapon, Gen AI. You can really transform the environment. You can really deploy your brain, your skills better by doing it differently. Let's just focus on fundamentals, and this is education.
Be optimistic, right? There is a bright future ahead of us.
Actually, Matthias Dopfner reminded us yesterday, Hans Appelbaum's words, pessimism is irresponsible in these days.
True, true. Krzysztof Krawczyk, Dalida Gepfert, Martin Wolf, Jakub Jaworowski, thank you so much. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.